Hello everyone, welcome to this video. Today I'm going to explain about AWS Lambda functions and how to create them through the console. But first, if this is your first time in the channel, please take a look to the playlist where you will find a lot of free tutorials for different tools and platforms like Jenkins, Docker, AWS, Terraform, Ansible, SonarQube, and more. Okay, but first, what are lambdas? Well, Lambda is part of the serverless framework in AWS. This is a service that will not run in any infrastructure that belongs to the user. Serverless is not meaning that it will not run on any infrastructure. It will run on an infrastructure, but this infrastructure will be managed by AWS. What that means for the user? It means that the user will not manage that infrastructure, and also it will not pay for that infrastructure, but it will only pay for the seconds or milliseconds that the Lambda will run in the AWS infra. Okay, one thing to note is that lambdas will help you to process a lot of requests in a small period of time, which means that applications with high performance and also applications that will receive millions of requests in a second will be a real candidate for using lambdas, because lambdas are designed to handle specific purposes. Let's say that you have an application or a code that will send emails or create backups or start backups, or I don't know, create templates for some kind. Well, this is a small task that can be handled by a lambda code, and you can execute by calling to an endpoint from your application or your service. Also, another thing that you need to take in count is that lambdas are event driven. What that means? It means that an event should occur in order to start or trigger the lambda, and for that one, as a trigger, we will use API gateways. Okay, but what about the price? The pricing. About the pricing, you can go to the public information. The price may vary to per the region, sorry. And here we can see an example of the architecture of the Lambda. Also, it will charge for the duration that the Lambda will run, and also for the number of requests. As you can see, it's only 20 cents per dollar per million of requests. Also, your lambda, it depends of your code, or it depends of how big or how demanding is your code. You will may require a bigger lambda. In this case, the memory is the only that matters, because if you lambda requires a gigabyte or 4 GB, then the pricing will be higher, obviously, because you are using AWS resources by calling that lambda. So this is the way that AWS is charging for the Lambda usage. Okay, let's go back to the actual console, and let's create a Lambda. Let's create a function. Here I'm calling the integration Lambda, for instance, this one. And here you can select the runtime, which means the code, the language of your code. It can be .NET, it can be Go, Java, Node, Python, and more. You can select here. And also you need to select the architecture for your code. It can be the standard one or ARM. Also, permissions. This one is important. You may already have a role for executing lambdas, but if you don't have any, you can select this one to create a new role here, and that role will allow the process to execute the lambda. Otherwise, you will not be able to do that. Here are more advanced settings that we will discuss in a later video, but for now I'm going to let them in the default one, and I'm going to create the Lambda. Okay, it just finished, and this is the Lambda dashboard. As you can see here, we will find the code tab, also the testing. We will take a look in a few seconds. Okay, the first thing that I want to mention is this is the sample code that AWS put in my Lambda, which is a very simple hello world, as you can see here the message. But this is the way that you can start typing your code here, or you can upload your own code by a zip file, or also you can retrieve the code for your Lambda from an S3 bucket. These are the options that Lambda can take to upload the code. Okay, let me create a new test here. Test Lambda. Here you can select the type, the event sharing settings. They can be private or shareable. And also you can specify inputs for your Lambda. In my case, as you can see, is only a hello world, so there is no need for input. So I'm going to save this test. I'm going to go to the test tab here, and here you can select the event name. Here is the test that I just created, and I'm going to test it. I'm going to run it. As you can see, it's in green, so it succeeded. So here in the details, you can take a look what happened with your Lambda. In my case, it's returning a 200 code, which is a success, and also is returning the message that I'm printing, which is a hello world, hello Lambda, hello from Lambda. Okay, this is the message from the code here. Oh, this is the code, the JS file. Okay. But how can I call this Lambda from any other service? There is no endpoint, there is no way to call it directly. But for doing that, we are going to use a trigger. Here I can click on Add Trigger, and here I'm going to select API Gateway, this one. If you already have one, you can select one, but if you don't, you can create a new one. So I'm going to create an API gateway here, create an API. I'm going to use the HTTP API, and for security, I will leave it open, but you can also use JWT tokens for securing your endpoints. More advanced settings that we will discuss in another video, and I'm going to add this trigger. Okay, it will take a second. Here is go back to the Lambda dashboard, and as you can see, the API gateway is right here. So now I'm redirected to the configuration tab. As you remember, we can see the code here, we have the test here, and now we are in the configuration one. Here you can specify more things about your Lambda. For instance, here the environment variables. What if your Lambda code needs an input for any reason or any kind of input? You can specify the environmental variable so your code will take it when it will be executed. But for now, we are interested in the triggers. So here the trigger, as you can see, AWS is showing the API endpoint. This one is the externalized endpoint that we are going to use to call our Lambda from external applications, for external services, or any place outside AWS console. If I put directly this one, as you can see here is the default, which is the stage for the API gateway, and also here is the endpoint name, integration Lambda. I'm going to execute it, and as you can see, the Lambda was triggered, was executed, and here is printing the output message from my Lambda code. Okay, if I go to the API gateway, it's opening in a new page. Here I can see all the stages I have for this one, and the stage that I have is the default one, and as you can see, that one is specified right here, default. But also I can go to the routes, to the routes, and here it is expecting for any method, any HTTP method. That's why it's called any, but you can specify what method you will accept for your endpoint. It can be a get, it can be a post, a put, delete, but that will depend on your Lambda code, what it will do. Okay, and this is how can we create and externalize a Lambda function by using API gateway. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe to the channel and let me know your comments. Thanks.